As the massive tidal wave floods Gotham City, we see a comic book staple being swept away. The bat signal, normally found on the roof of the Gotham City Police Department. That is just how deep the floodwaters are. Floating next to the signal are two bodies. As they spin to face the camera, we discover that we're looking at Commissioner Jim Gordon and Detective Harvey Bullock. Thankfully for them, Aquaman cuts through the water with speed and precision. He was attracted by the light of the bat signal and grabs the pair. Once he drops them off on a nearby rooftop, Batman joins them. Aquaman heard one of them shouting something underwater. It sounded like Barbara. Batman recognizes the name and assures Jim that Barbara, his daughter, is safe. The commish explains that they turned on the signal so they could tell Batman about the Scarecrow's goons who were kidnapping a witness, but Batman replies that they already handled that. Which is what we saw last episode. Kudos to author Jeff Johns for maintaining this totally unnecessary background plotline in the face of everything else that is driving the narrative and flooding the DC universe. Nice job. Batman says that they pulled the witnesses and what officers they could out of the water before leaving the scene. How many were they able to save? Gordon asks. Batman directs his vision to other nearby rooftops, where we see several crowds of people spread out on them. As many as we could, he replies. But it is not a lot, and Gordon's spirits fall. How many didn't make it out? We now see a single panel of what life looks like at street level right now. Cars have flooded, drowning those inside quickly. Bodies float in the water. Bullock's black humor makes him joke that they should be building an ark. What the hell is all of this? Batman answers calmly that they're under attack by Atlantis, and Bullock is honestly shocked. Wait, Atlantis is real? He always thought it was some kind of gimmick. Aquaman looks at him, vaguely offended. A gimmick? Well, yeah, Bullock shrugs. The Mad Hatter ain't from Wonderland. And you know, I'll fully admit that I personally have had a bit of a hard time believing that the people of the DC universe don't believe that Atlantis is real. I've accepted that was what John was telling us, like that's the story. You either play along or you don't. But in a world of aliens, magic, cyborgs, interdimensional warlords, and Greek gods, why couldn't Atlantis exist? Why wouldn't people be willing to believe that? But this throwaway line by Bullock does go a long way to explaining why most people would think that way, right? A lot, and I mean a lot, of super people do have weird gimmicks behind their powers that your normal, average, everyday schmuck just doesn't ever get an explanation for. As comic readers, we have an insight into the lives and backgrounds of these characters that the people who are in the world of the comics don't get to have. So we see Aquaman, and we are told that he is from Atlantis, and we accept it as fact as naturally as breathing, because we are outside of the narrative. But in the world of the narrative, in the world of the comics, in a world that is as strange as the DC Comics Earth, why would Atlantis be real? Why would anybody believe that story? That's some pretty cool insight, from a very unexpected avenue. A waterspout suddenly rises next to them all, revealing Mera. She pushes back at the incoming water, trying to keep the next massive wave from washing into the city. But ultimately, the strain is too much. Blood erupts from her nose, and she passes out for just a second and starts to fall. Aquaman catches her, depositing her on a nearby roof. She's upset that she failed to do more, adding, hauntingly, that she can feel the dead bodies in the water as she moves it. The cyborg managed to warn the city before the first wave hit, so they were able to get most of the people out, Aquaman says. She did great. This could have been a lot worse without her. It will be worse, Mera counters. They know the Atlantean war plans. First they flood the cities, then they'll send in ground troops, and then... Aquaman cuts her off. Yeah, he knows. But they need to keep that between them for now. He doesn't want to give the League a reason to panic. But Mera isn't happy about hiding. They need to tell the League. Because if Atlantis isn't stopped, if the plans proceed apace, then Atlantis is going to sink whatever city they target. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.11 of Aquaman, Throne of Atlantis, Part 2. That is a bummer of an opening scene. But that's kind of the point. Longtime listeners of the podcast might remember when Prince Namor flooded to New York City back in Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four issues 2 and 3. And we didn't see any bodies floating in the streets or drowned in cars back then. Nor did we see any heroes worrying about civilians for the most part. After the terrorist attacks on 9/11 in America, though, many American comic books began to treat the fictional violence that they perpetuated with a little more realism and respect. This helps to ground the stories better and make them feel more realistic because they more accurately reflect the world that you and I exist in. Johns is using the scene to establish the threat and the guilt of Atlantis. This isn't the story of a bad guy blowing up some random junk and then everything can just return to normal once he's been punched in the face and sent to jail. This is people dead by the dozens, if not the hundreds. This is war. This is something that Orm and Atlantis in general just can't walk back from. One of the things that I particularly like about the scene is the use of Gordon and Bullock. At first, I'll fully admit that it did bother me that Johns was putting so much spotlight and focus on Batman and his surrounding cast. I did buy an Aquaman comic, yes, that's what it said on the front cover. But this moment actually demonstrates how much of an outsider Aquaman is in this world. He is very comfortable with Batman, but Aquaman knows to fall back and let Batman be the one who handles these folks. This isn't Aquaman City that got flooded, it is Batman's, and deep down, I would argue that Arthur feels some guilt over this attack. He might not have launched it, but it was still his plan, and his ex-kingdom is the one doing it. So that aspect of the story makes a lot of sense, and it does kind of make me chuckle that Batman does a better job of emotionally connecting with Gordon and Bullock, and he's Batman, right? This is a character that we think of as untouchable and kind of unemotional, and he's a guy who has a plan, and normally when he leaves a scene with Jim Gordon, he just leaves in mid-sentence, leaving Jim Gordon hanging, right? And Aquaman, the guy who ostensibly looks more human, and if nobody thinks he's from Atlantis, thinks he's just a dude with water powers, right? He's just a dude. Batman is Batman. That guy's weird. Aquaman's just got fish powers. You would think that if anybody would have an easier time connecting with humanity, it would be Aquaman, but he doesn't. And there's something I really love about that. It highlights the fact that Aquaman is kind of caught between these two worlds, but neither a part of them, while Batman is firmly a part of Gotham City. And that's a really interesting contrast that we wouldn't have seen if we didn't have Batman in this scene. But there's another reason that Geoff Johns uses them as well. And it's because, for a lot of comic book readers, these two characters, Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock, are familiar. Maybe you're familiar with them from the Batman movies, or the comics, or the cartoons, or the TV shows, but readers in general know who Gordon and Bullock are, and they are invested in their continued survival. Because we've read stories about them, or seen stories about them, and we know who we are invested in their stories, and we don't want to see them die. So where maybe 100 people did die in this flooding attack, that sucks. But as an audience, it would hurt us more if we lost one of these two men. Plus, we don't really have, a human cast in Aquaman's own corner of the DC universe to really threaten, right? Except for Dr. Shin, and believe me, we're going to get to him shortly. If you flood the eastern seaboard, Aquaman's really just going to go, sucks. And he's probably going to feel guilty and terrible about it, but in terms of who he lost that matters, there isn't anybody. If Jim Gordon or Harvey Bullock lost, that is a loss that Batman would feel, and by extension, as audience members, a loss that we would feel. I also like the tiny moment between Arthur and Mera here at the end of the scene. They're supporting each other, which is great, but I love the individual ways that each of them is handling the threat of Atlantis. Mara pushes for total honesty, which is consistent with how she has behaved in her previous arcs and what her story has been. Aquaman hides something from her, Mara pushes for honesty. She's tired of being surprised by these things, right? Arthur, meanwhile, wants to hide the truth in order to spare people more emotional harm, which is also super consistent with his previous behaviors, especially what we just saw in the Other's story arc. That is a really nice touch, and Johns plays it super subtly, but I love it. In flooded Metropolis, Superman uses his X-ray vision to scan a unconscious Vulko. He looks okay on a preliminary search, but it is hard for Aquaman to tell if he actually is okay. He honestly isn't even sure if this guy has lungs in the conventional sense. Given how vaguely long Aquaman has been a member of the Justice League at this point, you would think that Superman would have X-rayed him at some point. Like, you'd think he would be a little bit more familiar with Atlantean biology. Although Arthur is a hybrid, so maybe he doesn't exactly conform to either human or Atlantean biological needs. Alright, consider my complaint rescinded. Well, if Vulko doesn't have lungs, then he is probably an Atlantean, Wonder Woman offers. Lois Lane, who was saved from the floodwaters by Vulko, gives them his name. As she steps closer, Wonder Woman holds her back, warning her that they don't know what they're dealing with yet. But Lois argues that this guy saved her life. They are dealing with a hero as far as she's concerned. Vulko's hand suddenly grabs Superman's arm as he panic wakes up, demanding to know where King Arthur is. Instinctively, Superman just pushes him back down to the roof, telling him to calm down, trying to get him to lay back. Vulko punches him instead, throwing Superman off of his body and into the nearest wall. Wonder Woman rushes in, holding her sword next to Vulko's neck, pinning him to the rooftop. If he takes another swing, she says, then so will she. Vulko realizes exactly what he did, and he apologizes for it, but they need to listen to him. They need to find Arthur now. Every moment that they wait, Atlantis gets one step closer. He seems to deflate a bit, saying that this would never have happened if Arthur was still king. I mean, this scene is pretty self-explanatory, so I don't intend to stay here long. I just want to point out one minor thing about this scene. That Vulko's punch is able to throw Superman a distance away from him. Don't get me wrong, Superman recovers super quickly, but that is still an impressive display of power. If all Atlanteans have that level of super strength, enough to send Superman flying, then Johns is telling us that an army of them is a legitimately dangerous threat, even to somebody as powerful as Superman. That's pretty cool. In Gotham City, Mara is still working to push back the rest of the floodwaters. Once she's done there, she'll move on to Metropolis, Aquaman explains to Batman. So the wave hits and then, what, nothing happens? Batman asks. If this was an attack, then where is Atlantis? Why aren't they attacking? They will be. Aquaman explains that they're going to wait to see which city was hit the hardest. That is the one where they'll send in troops, and then they'll sink the city. Which is all according to your plan, right? Batman asks. I wrote the plan with my brother a lifetime ago. I was in a different frame of mind, Arthur says. Why is Atlantis attacking? Batman asks. He thought that Arthur was their king. Can't he just call this off? No, Arthur replies. He's not their king anymore. But look, Atlantis wouldn't do this if they hadn't been provoked. Those rogue missiles that Batman told him about, they must have hit on or near Atlantis. That's why they're attacking. And Batman almost cuts him off. Wait, you're justifying their attack? No, I am explaining it, Arthur says. Every interaction that Atlantis has had with the surface world has been a bad one. It's all sailors hunting their people or having nuclear tests done in their water, or oil drilling and leaks and chemical spills and just problem after problem after problem. The Atlanteans are defensive because they have been forced to be defensive their entire lives, and if they feel like they have been attacked, then yeah, they're going to respond in kind. Hell, they'll respond 10 times harder if it gets this kind of attack from happening. But they can be reasoned with, he argues. Batman turns in the Batplane to stare at Arthur. They have already killed people. This has gone beyond reasoning with them. But if they counterattack, Arthur warns, then Atlantis is just going to continue to escalate. Look, Batman says, I know that these are your people, and here Arthur cuts him off, angrily declaring that they are not his people. There's an awkward silence in the cabin of the plane for a moment, and then Batman speaks. Arthur is the one who said that the League shouldn't be keeping secrets from one another. So, after everything that he's just told him, what isn't he saying? Arthur takes a moment to gather his emotions, and then he tells Batman his past. He found Atlantis after weeks of searching for it. The act of doing it nearly killed him. But when he finally got to Atlantis, they welcomed him wholeheartedly. His brother, Orm, who respects Atlantean law over everything else, even stepped down as king in favor of him. But it didn't last. There was dissension in Atlantean society, people who were upset that Arthur was only half Atlantean. They even tried to introduce some new laws which would strip him of the crown and reinstate Orm as a full-blooded Atlantean. So Arthur had to work harder than ever before to fit in with them, to be what they wanted him to be. Until Darkseid attacked the Earth. Until the Justice League came together to fight them. Until he found a place that would welcome him just as he was. Batman is beginning to understand just how hard this is going to be for Arthur. But he needs to understand that no matter the provocation, an attack of this scale isn't something that he can just walk away from. If his brother really is behind this attack, then they're going to have to bring him in. An alarm suddenly cuts them short. They've got incoming. The pair eject from the plane just seconds before it explodes. After landing in the water below them, Aquaman says that it must have been a long-range Atlantean weapon because he didn't hear or see it coming. And remember, Aquaman has enhanced senses, so we should have. Batman asks how they knew that Arthur was with him in order to target him, thinking that Aquaman was the target of this hit. But Aquaman says that they weren't aiming for him. They were trying to kill Batman. Aquaman knew that Batman would be a threat when he wrote these plans. Batman stares at him. Yeah, I'm flattered. So who else is on the hit list? A one, Dr. Stephen Shin. Bomb, bomb, bomb. Dramatic reverb. I told you we'd get to him. And we do briefly cut to Dr. Shin as he watches the incredulous news about the attacks. We don't have a thought bubble in the scene, but I'm kind of sure that he's thinking, "Who's the quack now, you Philistines?" So, there was a lot going on in that last scene between Aquaman and Batman, so let's take some time to break it down. First off, the attack on Metropolis, Gotham City, and Boston is a really smart plan. While Arthur wouldn't have known Superman and Batman personally when he initially made these plans, we know that there were public news stories about them when Arthur was a teenager. We saw this in Aquaman issue 0. And as someone who was unsure of his place in the world, I could see a young Arthur being fascinated by the stories surrounding these men. So he would have known that if you wanted to have success in attacking the surface world, you were going to need to keep those two forces occupied. And so you flood their cities. That keeps their attention focused on those cities, allowing Atlantis to move on Boston relatively unopposed, and Boston does not have a superhero who regularly lives there. That is a good, viable plan. Honestly, if something like the Justice League didn't work, then it may have even been successful. We see this plan then continue on as personalized attacks commence, targeting characters like Batman and Dr. Shin in all of the panic and confusion. As a vague fan of DC, as someone who knows and understands what the DC universe is, it feels right to target Batman. We all know that with enough prep time, Batman could kill God, right? That's the joke. But young Arthur, who wrote these plans years ago, shouldn't know that. He would have known about Batman, maybe even been impressed by the work he was doing in Gotham City, but the legend of Batman shouldn't have been cemented at that point in his history. If we had read the first arc of Justice League, which saw the team come together for the first time fighting Darkseid, we would have seen characters like the Green Lantern and the Flash comment that they didn't even think that Batman was real, nor did they know that he was just a human in a big bat suit. They were surprised by this. They didn't know how good he was. And so my point is that Aquaman was a huge mysterious question mark to the superhero world at large when Arthur would have been writing these plans. So he wouldn't have known to target Batman. This attack isn't really justified within the logic of the story. It makes sense to you and I as people outside of the story, but within the story, it doesn't quite add up. That said, I do love Batman joking about being flattered by the attack. This character does have a sense of humor, it's just rarely used, and I do think it is used best when it is rarely used. A good chunk of this scene is also John's exploring how complicated this attack is, and how superheroes might not really be the best solution for it. To be fair, I don't think that there is a good solution to this problem. Like, take away the idea that Atlantis is a hidden underwater city populated by superhumans armed with sci-fi weaponry and sea life. Let's say America accidentally launched missiles on something like North Korea. I think then we would expect a retaliatory attack. I think there would be a continuous back and forth of attacks as both of the nations flexed their muscles and rattled their sabers and demonstrated how, as global powers, they just didn't back down to anyone. It would take us months of negotiations, ambassadors making trips to both nations, and probably like pledges of aid to whoever took the most damage and maybe like a non-aggression treaty to get things to finally settle down. And I'm not a political or military strategist. Like, don't take my word for law. I'm just best guessing this. This probably isn't even close to what would really happen. But my point is that this situation isn't something that could be resolved in a nice 6-issue crossover. Add in the fact that the Justice League and an undersea army think that hitting things the hardest is probably the best way to solve this, and just how are they supposed to solve this? When do these sides stop? So the Justice League takes Orm captive. Let's say that happens. What happens to Atlantis then? Who's going to be ruling it? And what's to keep that successor from just continuing this war? Just maybe they switch over to guerrilla tactics. Or what if Atlantis succeeds in this attack and they do sink Boston? You and I certainly know that America wouldn't take that sitting down. And the League should know that too. They are mostly American. What I'm saying here is that in this story, there is no way that this goes well for anyone involved. Particularly Aquaman, whose chosen role as a bulwark between land and sea places him smack in the middle of all of this. On the one side, we have Arthur's relationship with the Justice League, right? These are, in his own words, his peers. The first set of people that he has felt truly comfortable with. With them, he isn't a weirdo half-breed, he's just another superhero. He likes these people, and he doesn't want to let them down. And then, on the other hand, we have the Atlanteans. As much as Arthur has tried to distance himself from Atlantis, he is still, essentially, their representative on the surface world. Humanity knows no other Atlanteans but him. The League expects Arthur to know and command the respect of Atlantis as well. We know, and he knows, that just isn't his role in their society anymore. But the League doesn't. Additionally, Arthur knows that this situation wouldn't have developed if he was the king, and this particular strategy wouldn't have been used if he hadn't developed it. There's a lot of guilt here, and Arthur's own sense of responsibility, and that's just going to drive him all the harder to fix this. The only thing that I don't like in this scene is the moment when Aquaman tells Batman that Atlantis will sink whatever city is hit the worst. And I'm fine with the honesty. I actually really appreciate that he has confidence in his friendship with Batman. Just be like, yo, they're going to sink a city. You guys should know about it. Johns ended the opening scene with Arthur and Mera incredibly dramatically, setting up this idea as if it was a big thing. But then like 10 pages later, Arthur just drops it like it's no big deal. Is the sinking of a city like, is it a thing or is it not a thing? And when Aquaman does mention it, Batman doesn't even blink at the idea. This is like the biggest possible climactic threat of this story, and nobody flooping cares about it? It's just, oh, they're going to sink a city? Yeah, all right, fine, let's go punch people. I don't think that this idea needs to be like a full page reveal that we end the scene on. Like, Atlantis is going to sink a city. And then you have a close up on Batman's face and he goes, oh, like, I don't think you need that. But there should be something, right? This smacks of my big complaint from issue 13 that Johns kept doing these big reveal moments that weren't actually big reveals, but like in reverse, because this was set up to be a big reveal, but then it's treated like it's nothing. If Johns was going to play this so casually, then why not have Mara say, you should tell the League about the sinking a city thing? And then Arthur would say, you know what? That's a good idea. Let me tell Batman. And then he could have just told Batman. Why have the dramatic setup if we're not going to get a dramatic reveal? Anyways, moving on, minor complaint. A cyborg checks on Aquaman and Batman, his sensors noticing that the Batplane got a little bit blown up. They report in that they're okay. Cyborg adds that he tried to call the Flash, but he's got something else going on unconnected to all of this crap. Aquaman says not to worry. The Atlanteans won't target the Flash. This makes sense, because the Flash generally works out of Central City, a fictional city located somewhere in the American Midwest, sometimes Indiana, sometimes Missouri. That makes it a mostly landlocked state, and it is incredibly difficult for Atlantis to attack that, even if the Flash could get to the eastern seaboard in a flash. Okay, cool, Cyborg says. He goes on to tell them that Superman and Wonder Woman have brought an Atlantean to the Watchtower, this guy named Volko. Aquaman and Batman go to the Watchtower, and Aquaman explains who Volko is to him. The pair hug when they meet, specifically when Arthur says that Volko is as close to family as he has left. The pair of them agree that the attack on Atlantis had to have been an accident, but Volko is the first one who suggests that somebody did this on purpose. Somebody wants a war. They just don't know who. We then cut away to the Mid-Atlantic, where we see the creatures of the trench continuing their swim upward. At their head is a large, scarred one, the Alpha that Aquaman fought back in issues 1 through 4. Back at the Watchtower, the League and Volko are discussing their options. Volko and Arthur want to try to talk to Orm, that they can end this peacefully. Superman is pretty adamant that Orm needs to be arrested, but Arthur argues that this guy isn't like a supervillain, right? He is the leader of a sovereign nation. You can't just beat him up, throw him in Arkham, and then expect this whole thing to be over. Cyborg then interrupts that something massive just appeared near Boston. Aquaman asks him to get Dr. Shin to safety, and then he turns back to Batman and Superman. Give him a chance to talk to his brother. Give him a chance to stop this. Batman does. Superman isn't happy about it, but Batman says that he gets just one shot, so make it count. In Boston, the storms are still raging. The city isn't quite flooded, but it is getting worse. In the harbor, fishing boats are knocked around, and crews are fighting to stay afloat. As they are busy doing this, a shadow emerges from the rain. In a commanding voice, the figure points to one of them and says, You will tell me where he is. Dressed in his full armor, armed with his scepter axe, King Orm of Atlantis demands that they tell him where their king is. And the men just stare at him. Orm blinks. I am speaking your language correctly, yes? He then dashes forward, grabbing a human by the throat. Where is the king of the lands? And this guy manages to barely choke out,
That he doesn't know who he's talking about. Do you mean the president, maybe?
No, I am talking about King Arthur, your ruler, human, Orm replies. Orm then leans in, listening to the man attempting to breathe. Humans breathe through these tiny little holes, he says, noticing the guy's nose. Then he covers it with his other hand. Or they don't breathe at all, do they? From behind him, Aquaman tells Orm to let the man go. He does, turning to take in his brother. Aquaman stands on the deck of the boat, his trident held in both arms before him, but not in a threatening position. It's at the ready if he needs it, but he's not attacking yet. A lightning flash behind him hides his face, and shadows obscuring his expression. Your people seem confused, brother, Orm says. They aren't my people, Arthur says. Not like that. I'm not their king. Well, if you aren't ruling them, then what are you doing up here, Orm says. Aquaman doesn't answer. Instead, he asks Orm where the Atlantean army is. Orm answers this easily. They're just under the waves, waiting for his signal. Your people broke the agreement, Arthur. This has all been a mistake, Arthur says. An accident. A mistake? Orm raises his scepter. Aquaman pulls up his trident defensively. He tells his brother that he needs to send the army home, and he needs to come with Arthur so they can figure this out. Orm says no. They are going to sink Boston into the ocean as a warning, as a cautionary tale. Who knows? Maybe in 1,000 years, these foolish surface dwellers won't believe that Boston ever existed either. A teleport effect suddenly appears behind Aquaman, and out of it steps Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. I said I would handle this, Aquaman says. Superman says that they've been listening in. Wonder Woman adds that it doesn't sound like it's being handled. Orm looks from them to Arthur. Are these three your rulers? No, Arthur says, and then he turns back to the League.
Guys, I need more time.
Superman folds his arms. They're tracking Atlanteans moving into positions around the city. There is no more time to give. Your brother is coming with us, Wonder Woman adds. I'm sorry, Aquaman says. And then he dashes forward and grabs Batman by the throat. You forced my hand. God, there is so much happening in this issue. Like, it felt never-ending writing it up. And after all that juicy, good drama between Arthur and the League, we've got this really cool ending with Orm. It's just awesome. Let's hit this in timeline order, though. First things first, we have Vulko and Arthur talking about the nature of this attack. For the first time in the story, somebody suggests that this attack was engineered by a third party, but no one gives a shit.
No swearing.
What? This is a mystery, and you are standing in the same room as the world's greatest detective, the floop-duping Batman, and yet no one cares? Why doesn't Batman investigate that plot thread in order to expose who is behind this attack, while Aquaman could lead Superman and Wonder Woman in countering Atlantis? The only way they're going to end this without open war is by presenting the real culprit of the attack, and we aren't going to find that person if we're all busy harassing Orm and Arthur on the docks. The USS Mavis is parked right in Metropolis now. I mean, upside down, but it's parked there, just waiting to be investigated. Go investigate it, please. Secondly, this is the first time that we really get to see Orm as a character on his own, acting as he would act without his brother around. And he's kind of terrifying. We do briefly get a little bit of comedy thanks to his assumption that Arthur rules the surface world, which John set up back in issue 14, and I don't know, I feel mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it is a nice bit of comedy that naturally comes out of the scene, but on the other hand, nothing in this comic has been funny. Everything in this comic has been really serious and kind of respectful of the type of story that John's trying to tell. This is a war story. Things are serious. And on the one hand, I do think some levity could be used. And on the other hand, it also feels a little bit out of place. Like, this isn't the black humor that Harvey Bullock was using at the opening of the issue. This is author Jeff Johns using some humor here, and I don't really know. But this bit of comedy does demonstrate that Orm does not have a solid understanding of how the surface world works, and what the potential fallout of this kind of attack could be. Orm literally has no idea what he's dealing with here. He is as uninformed about the surface world and how it works as Batman is uninformed about Atlantis. That is going to make this conflict incredibly uneven and even more difficult for them to resolve. As part of that scene, we do see Orm try to suffocate a guy, which feels really creepy. It comes off kind of like a morbid curiosity, like Orm doesn't understand how such a fragile species is even still alive, much less how it poses a threat to Atlantis. But is Johns telling us that Atlanteans breathe air and water? Because, like, My understanding is that humans breathe through our nose and mouth, which are connected to our lungs, while Atlanteans draw oxygen from the water through their gills, located on the sides of their necks. But now that this has actually been pointed out, how has Mera been breathing on land this entire time? How is Orm breathing right now? Not only are they both just standing around, breathing, but their necks are covered by costumes. We even saw the Atlantean soldiers back in issue 5 struggle to breathe when their helmets containing water were shattered. So it's not like Atlanteans can breathe pure oxygen. They need the water. It's really easy to breeze past this scene and just accept that it is showing us how bloodthirsty Orm can be when he is pushed to it. Because it does do that. I can't say it doesn't. But in doing so, I think Johns is kind of accidentally pointing out a plot hole. But the point here is that Orm is willing to kill, and over something as paltry as his own curiosity. When motivated by the death of his countrymen, well, who knows how far he would go. Finally, we have the big three showing up, and they absolutely ruin Aquaman's deal. There was a chance, and it's a slim chance, but a chance, that Orm would trust his brother and leave here. But when these three show up, Arthur's energy just immediately changes. He goes from, I'm trying to make you think I'm in charge, Orm, to, guys, give me 5 more minutes. And it just totally undercuts whatever authority he had. Orm sees this, and he actually thinks that they're in charge, which is kind of hilarious to me because, let's face it, in the DC universe, they kind of are in charge. They are called the Trinity, for God's sakes. They are easily 3 of the most recognizable super beings on the planet, both DC's and our Earth's, and everyone takes them more seriously than a character like Aquaman. Even Orm, when he sees them. Arthur needs to take control of this situation. He needs to protect his brother. He needs to protect the Atlanteans. He needs to protect the surface world. He needs the League to back the floop off. So he takes drastic action. He grabs Batman, the one person there without superhuman flexes, the one person there without enhanced strength or enhanced physical stature. Like, this is the one person out of the 3 that Aquaman could actually harm. But we also know that Arthur is a good guy. No way does he actually want to hurt Batman, right? I also want to take a moment to recognize that this issue sees the introduction of our new ongoing art team. Penciler Paul Pelletier, inkers art Thibert and Karl Kesel, and colorist Rod Reis. And I love them! Oh, the first book that I sat up and took notice of Paul Pelletier on was CrossGen's Negation, which he absolutely crushed. Oh, I love that book. And I'm always stoked when he shows up on a comic that I'm buying. He's one of those artists in the industry that can just crank out a comic on a regular basis, and they always look great, but somehow he never gets the fame of other creatives, and I don't understand why. His art style is a good balance of realistic and animated. His characters have distinct faces, but it's not like they're photographs either. His figures look superheroic, but they don't look super deformed. He can draw sci-fi, fantasy, classic superheroism. His characters act well, like they emote well, and his action scenes are elegant and impactful. Pelletier is one of those artists that just makes me want to draw comics. Oh, I just love his stuff, and I'm always happy to see him show up on a book, especially a book like Aquaman. That fill-in issue with Pete Woods, by all means, wasn't a bad issue, but it was definitely the worst-looking issue of the book so far, and now that Pelletier's back on the book, oh, I know that we're going to be solid for however long he's on here. Next week, the Justice League has had enough of Aquaman and his attempts to settle this peacefully. It's time to get rough. It's Justice League versus Aquaman. And Orm, too, I suppose. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.12 of Aquaman, The Throne of Atlantis, Part 3. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.